Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Maura Policelli, and I'm the Executive Director here of the Keough Schools Washington office. On behalf of Dean Mary Gallagher, welcome to this afternoon's panel discussion. It's an absolute honor to once again be hosting the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, which is one of the Keough Schools' 9 institutes, and its incredible Peace Accords Matrix team, led by the amazing Josefina Echevarria Alvarez. For over 40 years, the Kroc Institute has been the premier academic center for peace studies in the U.S., featuring undergraduate, graduate, and PhD programs for students from around the world. The Kroc Institute is one of the anchor institutes that comprises the Keough School. And our school, we strive for evidence-based research informing policy. That is the ethos of our school. Throughout the 9 institutes, all of our curriculum, and our faculty research. And the Peace Accords Matrix is the most robust example of how academia can inform policymaking. In fact, the first ever event here at the Keough Schools Washington office, and there's actually a picture of it over on the wall, the very first event we had when we opened our space here, the spring of 2018, featured the Peace Accords Matrix, its research at the early stages of the 2016 Peace Accord. And that event actually also coincided with at the time, it was the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement in Ireland. So we were connecting up, as we have on other occasions, the history, the lessons between the Irish Peace Accord and the work that Pam is doing in Colombia. We have done many of these convenings, many opportunities to feature the work of the Peace Accords Matrix and specifically the Colombia Barometer. It is wonderful when our team from campus comes here to present to diplomatic and policy leaders like yourselves, as well as to speak with officials on Capitol Hill, which we'll be doing tomorrow, and to share their research. And today we're especially honored to have senior representatives of the U.S., Mexican, and Colombian governments with us. We have Assistant Secretary Ann Wachowski from the State Department. We have Mexico's ambassador to the U.S., Esteban Barragan, and we have Colombia's ambassador to the U.S., Daniel Garcia Peña Jaramillo, who will be with us later in the program. So after some opening remarks from Assistant Secretary Witkowski and Ambassador Barragan, we will have a presentation from the Colombia Barometers team, and they will be presenting specifically their latest report, ethnic report. And following that, Josefina will be moderating a conversation with some panelists who are here with us today to share their reflections on the latest report. So now I have the honor of introducing Assistant Secretary Witkowski. She was sworn in to the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations in January 2022. Before then, she was the Senior Democracy Fellow at Freedom House. And in government, she has served in several other positions in the U.S. government, specifically the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs, at the Pentagon, and at the State Department, she was the acting principal deputy coordinator at the State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism, as well as the Bureau of Counterterrorism's deputy coordinator for Homeland Security and Multilateral Affairs. In her current role, Assistant Secretary Witkowski has not only been a wonderful friend of the Peace Accords Matrix team and their research, but she also has created opportunities for graduate students at the Keough School to engage with her team on a variety of research projects, and has launched at the State Department a brand new partnership called the Academic Centers of Conflict Anticipation and Prevention. She launched that over a year ago, and that allows the Keough School and other universities from around the country to provide research and support to her senior officials at the State Department. So she is a great champion of peace policy, and she is also a great friend of the Keough School. So please join me in welcoming Assistant Secretary Witkowski.
Maura, thank you. And it is my great pleasure to be a good friend of the Keough schools and the Kroc Institute. Josefina, where are you? Dr. Echevarria, Ambassador Garcia Pena, arriving later, Ambassador Moctezuma, and distinguished guests, thank you very much for allowing me to open this important conversation on the implementation of Colombia's 2016 Peace Accord. The United States remains committed to the implementation of the accord. Its full implementation is key to bringing a stable, peaceful end to decades of conflict and crisis, and is in the interest of both the Colombian and American peoples. As the first international accompanier of the Peace Accord's ethnic chapter, the United States is particularly committed to ensuring that the benefits of peace reach all Colombians with fairness and dignity. This matters to us not only because of our principles, but for a practical reason. Peace processes have more stable outcomes when they center the needs of the most affected populations. The United States would also like to recognize the government of Mexico, thank you, for its efforts as a fellow international accompanier of the Peace Accord's ethnic chapter. A wonderful partner. As Secretary Blinken noted when announcing U.S. accompaniment of the ethnic chapter, when every community has equal access to opportunity, to justice, to development and security, all of society benefits. Today's event marks the release of an important report capturing how far Colombia has come towards implementation of the ethnic approach's commitments. Much work remains to be done, and you'll hear about that in a little while. It is also, though, essential to note Colombia's progress and ambition in advancing the inclusion of historically marginalized populations. And this understanding is only possible thanks to the Kroc Institute's rigorous and authoritative monitoring and reporting. At the Department of State's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, we are extraordinarily grateful for the Kroc Institute's outstanding work in illustrating the magnitude of what Colombia has achieved, as well as the challenges that remain ahead. I have seen the Kroc program in Colombia and its impressive researchers in action myself, and I'm proud that we have supported their groundbreaking work over the past 8 years. It has provided a wealth of data and invaluable lessons to others seeking a lasting peace, even far beyond Colombia's borders. Colombia is diverse. Over 4.5 million Colombians identify as Afro-Colombian, and nearly 2 million belong to indigenous communities. Their cultures, traditions, and communities contribute to the beautiful tapestry of Colombian society. They've been historically marginalized and bore a disproportionate impact during decades of conflict. The 2016 Peace Accord recognized the impact of the conflict on these communities and embarked on a process of correcting historical wrongs through 80 commitments across all 6 points of the Peace Accord that advance their political participation, free, prior, and informed consent in implementation, land rights, security guarantees, and rights as victims of conflict. Colombia has made progress in implementing these commitments, establishing the Special High-Level Forum with ethnic peoples, IAMPE, to advise the government on implementation of the ethnic approach and revising national policies to reflect principles of inclusion and prior consultation. Ethnic communities began receiving formal land titles. Colombia's Truth Commission dedicated a chapter to the unique impacts of decades of violence on the communities. But at the same time, implementation continues to lag behind the overall peace accord. Planning frameworks have not incorporated consultations to the extent that they could. National programs have fallen short in prioritizing inclusion. And Colombia's ethnic communities continue to bear a disproportionate burden of violence that has not ended with the FARC's demobilization. These challenges, though, are solvable. Colombia's government and civil society have expressed a will to prioritize equity, and equality, raising up its marginalized communities. Organizations like IAMPE and the local peace councils are spreading understanding of the Peace Accord's commitments across Colombia, and international partners are ready to accompany further implementation. Colombia's 2016 Peace Accord holds lessons for peace builders everywhere. Lessons like the importance of inclusion, the challenges of implementation, and the transformative power of rigorous monitoring. Too often, so-called peace is brokered without references to the voices and needs of those most affected by conflict. Processes may recognize civil society only as tokens with decisions made by distant elites rather than through the agency of communities themselves. These settlements can often fail at producing stable, sustainable peace because they lack legitimacy among affected populations. Inclusive processes focus on the needs of those who will have to live with the outcomes reached at the table. The negotiations that led to Colombia's 2016 peace accord recognized that Indigenous and Afro-Colombian populations bore an unequal burden of violence during the war and included representatives from those communities in the talks. As a result, the peace accord addressed not only the political needs of the combatants, but also demands for systemic change that improve the agency and lived experiences of historically marginalized populations. Colombians seized the negotiations as a path to a more just country and became powerful advocates for the peace accord in the process. The United States takes this lesson to heart. A sustainable peace must include impacted communities and decisions about their future. This takes time. It requires careful management of expectations, and it is worth the effort because, as Colombia shows, an inclusive peace addresses the root causes of conflict, meets the needs of those most affected, and provides the dispossessed with an ownership of peace and the means to build a better future. The benefits of peace only come through successful implementation. And implementing the 2016 Peace Accord's ambitious commitments to resolving the root causes of conflict within the 15-year timeline was always going to be a challenge. Colombia's experience up to now, halfway through that timeline, illustrates just how much of a challenge it can be. The Peace Accord was visionary in establishing a coordination body for implementation, the CICIV, to resolve disputes as they arose, and in calling for consultations with the communities and populations affected by its commitments. It has also shown us that implementation is its own kind of negotiation, where agencies jockey for resources and the commitments made in a peace agreement compete against other obligations. We must be vigilant that even as a government is being pulled in many different directions, its promises to the most vulnerable, such as those covered in Colombia's ethnic chapter, are kept. The United States applies this lesson from Colombia to our peace-building efforts. The importance of supporting conflict stakeholders, not only in planning what they want to achieve, but also in designing implementation frameworks that are adaptable and sustainable. This requires careful coordination and long-term commitment, and it's essential for being good stewards of peace and public resources. Of course, none of these lessons from Colombia would be possible without effective monitoring. Every agreement requires accountability, a way for parties to check that actions reflect the agreement's words. This is a formidable undertaking for a peace accord as large as Colombia's. The Kroc Institute's work in this case has set new standards of depth and quality, measuring 578 commitments, including the 80 covered in today's report, which you'll be hearing more about, providing quantitative data on levels of implementation, releasing new information as soon as it can be validated, and communicating in accessible formats that reach Colombians everywhere, from the remotest villages to La Casa de Nariño. This clarity changed how we interact with the peace accord. Timely updates enable government, civil society, and international partners to steer our efforts for greater impact. The detailed accounting keeps important topics like the ethnic approach from being obscured by broader efforts. And a comprehensive, unbiased source of truth for the peace accord allows the Colombian people to discuss accomplishing the work that remains, rather than argue about what's already been done. This rigorous monitoring makes Colombia the envy of so many other peace processes. Building peace is hard. Our resources are always too limited. And a clear voice that recognizes our successes and catches our shortcomings is an invaluable tool for us all in keeping our commitments. This new report calls for renewed dedication to the Peace Accord's ethnic approach commitments and makes recommendations about key actions to prioritize. It also notes areas where past implementation has been inadequate. These observations are a helpful guide to the obstacles and the opportunities ahead. The report is also a reminder of the ambition of the peace accord, of the need for sustained engagement over many years, and of the challenges in restructuring a society through peace. Colombia has made great strides in tackling this issue. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it is this: we will continue to accompany the Colombian people as they face their challenges head on. I look forward to this afternoon's discussion and the lessons we can all continue to learn from Colombia on inclusive peace building. Thank you for your time and the commitment of all of you to building a more peaceful future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Witkowski. I now have the honor of introducing Mr. Moctezuma, the Ambassador of Mexico, who was sworn in as the Ambassador of Mexico to the United States in February of 2021. He has held many other government positions. Just a few I will mention. He has been Secretary of Public Education, along with Secretary of Social Development, Senator of the Republic, and Secretary of the Interior. He also has had a very distinguished career in civil society. Some of the positions that he has held in civil society include President of the Board of Trustees of the National Institute of Public Health, member of the Assembly of the National Council to Prevent Discrimination, Vice President of the Organization of Employers in Basic Education, and President of Social Commitment for Quality and Equity in Education, among many others. He's also an accomplished author. So please join me in welcoming Mexico's ambassador to the U.S., Esteban Moctezuma.
Thank you very much, Maura. Ann Witkowski, Josefina Echevarria Alvarez. Good afternoon to all of you. I want to acknowledge the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame for its commitment to the implementation of the peace agreement between the government of Colombia and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. As noted by the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Colombia, Carlos Ruiz Massieu, by the way, it's a Mexican diplomat, the 2016 peace agreement is a clear example that dialogue and negotiation are the only ways to really resolve problems. As you are aware, during President Gustavo Petro's official visit to Mexico in November of 2022, President López Obrador reaffirmed the Mexican government's commitment to support and promote the ethnic chapter contained in the peace accords. The inclusion of this chapter, with its cross-cutting perspective, has made this agreement exceptionally innovative and one of the most comprehensive of its kind. Of particular note are the inclusion of a gender approach to promote the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace building. Also, I would like to highlight the promotion of transnational justice to seek reconciliation and restore trust in Colombian society. All of these follow the mainstream of the ethnic approach in the final agreement, including the specific measures to guarantee the rights of ethnic peoples. The government of Mexico has worked to develop a bilateral agenda aimed at addressing the needs of indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants in both countries. This has been achieved through technical cooperation, as well as the exchange of experiences and best practices. This year, we contributed to the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia to support an event in the department of Chocó focused on advancing the implementation of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement. This event goal was to enhance collaboration between state and ethnic territorial authorities to expedite and improve the implementation of this chapter in the region. Mexico's role as an international accompagner has been to provide support, oversight, and encouragement, ensuring that the provisions of the ethnic chapter are actively implemented. This is rooted in Mexico's own experience with diversity and reconciliation. Mexico has a historic diplomatic tradition of contributing to the peace resolution of disputes and peace in Latin America. We gladly accept this responsibility and feel honored by this trust that reflects Mexico's long-standing commitment to peace, to the dignified life and rights of Colombia's diverse ethnic peoples and communities, and throughout them, to the well-being of Colombia as a whole. In line with our recent role as an elected member of the Security Council, and at the request of the government of Colombia, we promoted with the United Kingdom Resolution 2615, which requested the Secretary General to provide recommendations for expanding the mandates of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia to monitor the progress and compliance with the ethnic chapter. Ethnic communities in Colombia have endured profound hardships, and it is imperative that tangible actions are taken to foster genuine equity and justice. This involves supporting the creation of inclusive policies, facilitating dialogue between communities and authorities, and monitoring progress to address any challenges that may arise. This means not only recognizing the unique needs of these communities, but also empowering them to play an active role in their own development and in shaping the future of their nation. With information from the government, the United Nations Verification Mission, and think tanks like the Kroc Institute, we are aware of the challenges in advancing the ethnic chapter's indicators. However, we acknowledge the Colombian government's efforts, particularly through the Office of the Vice Presidency, to promote the Pact for the Ethnic Chapter and achieve 60% progress on the indicators by 2026. Thank you all for attending today. Thanks for having us. And we look forward to learning about the Kroc Institute findings on the implementation of the Colombian Peace Accords ethnic approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Now we have two of our fantastic representatives of the Colombia Barometer Initiative here to present their research. I am pleased to introduce Angela as the Executive Director of the Barometer Initiative in Colombia, and Yvonne, who is the researcher specializing in monitoring the ethnic approach for the Barometer Initiative. So I think they'll be coming up to the podium or the chairs, wherever they're most comfortable. Sure.
Is this one turned off?
That's still on. Should be on.
Good afternoon, everyone. For me, it's a great pleasure to be here. More than a pleasure, it's an honor for three main reasons. The first one is because me and my colleague are going to represent or are representing our team that has put tons of effort to pull this out. The second is it has to do with your presence here today. At Kroc, we believe that it is more important to find a committed audience than actually making the reports. So thank you for being here, listening to us, listening to our findings, and of course, to the opportunities that the ethnic chapter has, the ethnic approach has in the Colombian implementation of the peace accord. And the third one has to do with the topic that we're going to talk about today. As you all know, we're presenting the main findings of our latest report regarding the implementation of the ethnic chapter. And I think everyone knows here in the room, we have already heard the ambassador, the assistant secretary, that the most affected communities in Colombia are actually the ethnic communities. And therefore, any efforts that we can make to show how the implementation of the peace accord has changed their lives and which or which obstacles they're facing are not enough. As we were saying, we're here to present our third special report regarding the implementation of the ethnic chapter of the final accord, and we've decided to call it a call to action. And actually, we decided to call it like that because, as you all know, tons of efforts have been made, but those have not been enough. As you're going to see through our presentation, the ethnic chapter and the ethnic approach still faces a lot of challenges, also as you have heard already from the ambassador and assistant secretary. Our presentation is not on. Oh, thank you. Sorry. So our presentation or our report, the first thing we have to say is that it goes through May 2022 through May 2024. We're going to show you some numbers, aggregated numbers since 2016, but the main findings and all of the events and the analysis that you're going to find there has a special emphasis through these 2 years. The main findings that we wanted to discuss with you today are 3 of them. First of all, as you have heard already, despite all of the efforts that have been made to implement the ethnic chapter and the ethnic approach in Colombia, there still faces a lot of challenges. We're going to show you the numbers later on, and you're going to see how there's still a gap between the general implementation and the implementation of the ethnic chapter. The second one of the biggest challenges that the implementation of the ethnic approach is facing is actually the lack of articulation between the different institutions, and especially between the institutions at the national level and the local level. One of the main findings that my colleague is also going to present is how the development plans at the local level, even though in some cases include specific mentions to the ethnic approach, there are no indicators or specific actions to actually make it happen. And the third, and one of the most important conclusions, as you have also heard from our guests today, is that the international accompaniment and the international community as a whole has been really, really important for the implementation of the peace accord as a whole, but now recently, since 2022, to have the international accompagners has also helped to trigger the implementation of the peace accord. Some of you don't know our methodology, so I'm going to go really quick through it. One of the characteristics that our reports has is that we present qualitative analysis. Yvonne is going to present that later on, but first we wanted to show you some numbers. So one of the characteristics, as I was saying, is that we present quantitative analysis. As Secretary Assistant was just mentioning, we follow 578 commitments for the whole peace accord implementation. We call them stipulations. Those are commitments that can be actually observable, measurable, and that we can actually follow. For the ethnic approach, we monitor 80 commitments, and these are the numbers that we're going to present to you today. So besides monitoring these 80 commitments, on a monthly basis, we do an exercise that we call coding exercise. So basically what this means is that we see the stage of implementation that each of these commitments has. So, and then based on evidence, we say at what stage they are. So we're gonna have commitments that are still not initiated. This means that they have not started being implemented. We have commitments that are at a minimum level. This means that a small action has been taken to start implementing them. We have commitments that are in an intermediate level. This means that we have enough evidence to foresee that if it continues to be implemented as it has been implemented, it's going to be able to complete within the time frame period for the peace agreement. For those that don't know, the peace agreement is supposed to be completed in 15 years since it started. So the time frame for the implementation of the peace agreement is until 2031. And finally, we have those commitments that are complete. So based on our methodology, if we take a look at the graph, you're going to see how 13% of the commitments have been completed by May 2024. 14% of the commitments are in an intermediate level. 61% of the commitments are in a medium level, and 13% of the commitments have not initiated. According to what I just told you, this means that 74% of the commitments by May 2024 are not viable. This means that we don't have enough evidence to be able to state that by 2031, these commitments are going to be complied with. As you can see, it's a very critical situation. The actions that the government of Colombia has to take are specifically in those commitments that are at the minimum level. So they need to have continuous effort to be able to move those commitments at the minimum level that are around 49 commitments to move them to an intermediate level. The second thing that you can see in this graph is how it was growing really fast. And in the latest years, you can see it is more flattened. And actually, if you take a look at the numbers, you're going to see how since May 2022 to May 2024, there has been only one change of 1% from those commitments that had not initiated and that migrated to the minimum level. This actually happened because of two plans that were approved in Colombia, the technical assistance plan and the food plan. And not only because they were adopted, but actually they included specific actions for the ethnic commitments. And this is something that I should have said also. Since we follow the 578 commitments as a whole for the implementation, when we evaluate how the ethnic approach is doing, when we take a look at these 80 commitments, we also take into account different criteria. This means that a stipulation or a commitment can move forward in the general implementation, but may stagnate or not move forward in the ethnic implementation, because what we take into account is that actually the implementation of this commitment has taken into account, for instance, representation, participation of the ethnic communities, and has actually made an effect on the communities. So that's why in this next graph, you're going to see how the general implementation is different from the ethnic implementation. And you're going to see how the ethnic implementation is lagging behind. If you take a look at the graph, you're going to see how 13% of the commitments of the ethnic approach have been completed, while 33% of the commitments of the general implementation have been completed. And then you're going to see the difference in each stage of the implementation. So again, if we take a look at the graph, 74%, according to a methodology, 74% of the commitments, those that have not initiated and those that are at minimum level, are not viable for the ethnic approach, while only 48, it's not an only because we're still having challenges for the general implementation, but you can see the difference between the 48% of the general implementation that is still not viable. So basically, we're having there more than 20 percentage points difference. I'll give the floor to my colleague, who will give you some of the latest findings, especially the opportunities, the challenges, and what we have been able to accomplish until today. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for spending this afternoon with us. I will share with you some of the qualitative data we have found in the work we do in a barometer team in Colombia. We have a team at the national level and also a team at the regional level. They allow us to get data from the roots, but also from the national government and different entities that have different responsibilities in the implementation of the ethnic approach. For this report, we have 6 thematic areas that we analyzed. The first one has to be with the planning for peace with the ethnic approach. In this first thematic area, it's transversal to the whole 6 points of the peace agreement. One of the first findings we have in this topic is that despite of the Colombian government efforts to plan and the implementation of the ethnic approach of the peace accord, there's still a lot of difficulties, especially integrating the prior consultation and different programs at the national and the local level. What that means, the prior consultation is a right for the indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities that allows them to have the voice on what is going to be implemented in the territory. So we see a lot of issues. Actually, in the framework plan for implementation, there are 100 indicators for the ethnic approach, and 23 of these indicators implies that the implementation of a prior consultation. So talking about the framework plan of implementation, we see a lot of difficulties in the indicators. Actually, right now, the government is going through reviewing these indicators. So one of the recommendations we will point out later is the importance of the United States government and Mexico to encourage the Colombian government to include a comprehensive reviewing of the framework for implementation. So another of findings is that we see some specific measures for ethnic communities in the formulation of the national plans. As Angela said, there is 16 national plans for the rural reform. 2 of them include measures for the ethnic communities. However, the ethnic approach doesn't have enough indicators. They allow the responsible entities to include technical and financial resources for the implementation of these national plans. The second thematic area that have a link with the second point of the peace agreement have to be with democracy and political participation for the ethnic communities. This is a very important topic because for building peace on the long term, we need the participation of the whole society, including the ethnic communities. So here we see the National Council for Peace renewal. Some of the leaders that are part of this national forum, but we also have councils at the local level. Despite in the formal constitution of this council, there is the participation for the ethnic communities, there is no enough guarantees for the effective participation of these communities. That means we are talking about communities that are in the rural areas that need enough funds and technical support to have access to information, but also to participate in the development of plans for reconciliation at the local level. Also, in this period, we see a lot of issues for the ethnic community to have access to the radio stations. The peace agreement stipulates there will be radio stations specifically for the ethnic communities. So far, the government have made 2 calls, and despite there have been the viability for some of those organizations, they are not able to get enough license because they don't have the resources to put in place the technical capacity that is required to put in place the radio stations. Relate to political participation, the peace accord say there will be a special voting seats in the Congress for the victims of the conflict for the 16 regions that have been prioritized for the peace agreement. So in the elections, we see the government put in place different mechanisms to guarantee the participation of the ethnic organizations. However, what we see in the elections was there was no enough financial resources so the ethnic leaders can develop all they need for the campaign. So finally, 5 of the 16 seats are from the ethnic communities. However, what we heard from the communities is lack of representations because traditional parties get involved in this process. So we will have a second round for these special seats, and we expect that the government have the ability to put in place what is needed to guarantee the effective participation of the ethnic communities. The third topic we include in this report had to be with transformation of the ethnic territories. And here we include the analysis of the development programs with territorial focus. We also include the analysis of the national program for substitution of illegal crops. So one of the main findings is we see that the ethnic communities have been taking access to land rights. However, the numbers or the data that the government is collecting is not clear. So what process for land access correspond to the peace agreement, and which of those are process that have been started before the peace agreement. So what we need here especially is the government put in place sub-accounts that can show clearly every one of the process to land access for the ethnic communities, including indigenous people and Afro-Colombian people. But also relate to the land access, the peace accord established that the wrong community will also have access to land. However, they have not been in place the law that is required for that. So far the Roma population, that is a very small population in Colombia, doesn't have access to land yet. We see some progress in prior consultation, especially in the land survey policy. However, so far we don't see the implementation of the land survey in the collective territories for the ethnic communities. So the government have the goal of advance and then 70% of the land survey of the country. But right now we have been in the data, there is advance in the 12%, but any of those, that 12% correspond to ethnic territories. Despite the efforts to implement the programs, the development programs with territorial focus, there is still a issue in the implementation of the ethnic owned projects or initiatives. These are the initiatives that the ethnic communities prioritize during the construction of the development plans with territorial focus. So one of the bottlenecks is the lack of technical capacity to structure the projects. Two, after you have the projects, you can find the funds, financial funds for different resources. But there is still a lot of work that's needed from the ethnic organizations, but also the local municipalities to advance in these projects. During this last year, the Colombian government approved the national drug policy. And in the national drug policy, we see some mentions about the ethnic approach. However, this had not been implemented yet, but this have a really importance because it's connected to the national plan for the substitution of illegal crops. So far, the program has been working in a lot of communities, organizations, or families from the communities as part of the program. However, the program never put in place an ethnic approach that recognized the collective ownership of the land of the ethnic communities. So what we expecting in the next year is that the government go through the prior consultation and include some specific measures to guarantee the sustainability of the program for the substitution of illegal crops. In the fourth thematic area, we analyze security guarantees, landmine removal, and the harmonization plans for reincorporation. What we have been seeing is still in the collective territories, there's a lot of issues with security for the ethnic communities, a lot of internal displacement, confinement from the ethnic communities, but also a lot of threats for the self-governance for the ethnic communities. So what we see is, especially in the landmine removal, the ethnic chapter have prioritized 10 territories. From those 10 territories, just one have been declared free of landmines. The other 9 have the issue of the security, because to go into operations, there is the need of the clearance for the Minister of the Defense, but because the presence of different armed groups in the area have been very difficult to advance in those 10 territories around Cauca, Nariño, El Meta, and other territories. The national government adopts some measures to improve the conditions of the indigenous guard. However, there is no official recognition of the Cimarrona Guard. This is important because this is another approach of security, is the recognition of the cultural aspects of and collective aspects of and security guarantees. So this is very important for the community. And we think from the perspective of the monitoring that we do, that is one of those actions that can be made really fast for the Ministry of Interior to promote better security guarantees in these territories. Then about reincorporation, what the peace accords say. The peace accords say they will be put in place an harmonization plan for ex-combats. That means a special route so ex-combats that want to go back to their original communities have the opportunity for different spaces, dialogue with the leaders of their community. However, this plan has to pass through prior consultation. The expectation was that this plan was made on 2018, and the prior consultation just closed last year. So now we are expecting the government put in place the resources to start to implement this harmonization plan that is really important to make sustainable on time the reincorporation of some of these combats from indigenous communities and Afro-Colombian communities. The thematic area number 5, this is related to the victims, point 5 of the peace accord. Here in the report, you will find we analyze 2 big thematic. One is related to the 3 institutions that were created in the framework of the peace accord. First, the True Commission, that finalized their mandate, but as part of the final report, they include a special chapter for ethnic communities that have high levels of representation of the ethnic organizations around the country, and even victims of the conflict for the ethnic communities that have been left the country due to the conflict. And many of the findings that were included in this chapter are part of the work of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace that just opened the case number 9 that recognized the differential approach, but also disproportionate effects of the conflict in the ethnic communities. So this case number 4 represents a very important advance for the community. Because recognize their differential differential approach of the peace accord. Also, the unit for the search of victims of the conflict from the ethnic communities, also this unit recognize the ownership of the collective territories of the organization and have been working together in different plans that recognize the self-governments. Actually, in this report, you will find different special territorial cases, and one of the cases that we highlight with the unit for the search of missing people is in Cauca with indigenous people when they together build one of these plans. And last is the thematic area 6 for monitoring and promotion of mechanisms. First, we have the Forum for Ethnic People, the YAMPE. The YAMPE have been going through a lot of issues to guarantee the technical capacity, but finally this year the government provided fundings that they needed, so they just launched the third report. And it is important that YAMPE continues to work with the national government and can complete with its mandate. Also, the UN verification mission in Colombia expand its mandate. So now in their reports, we can find some of the different situations of the ethnic communities, especially in different regions because of the presence of the UN. And finally, was we were saying, and Angela said in her remarks, is the international companion component for the ethnic approach, having carried out activities, helping the vice president, and putting in place different projects at the regional level to promote the implementation of the Peace Accord. So this is the thematic areas you will find in our report. More detail will be there and a lot of information, but finally we will give some the opportunities to improve the implementation of the ethnic chapter of the Peace Accord from the international community. First, we see that it's important to encourage the Colombian government to address the security issues from the ethnic communities in the rural areas. Also, to create a strategic plan for the accompaniment. That means to coordinate the government of the US, the government of Mexico, to put in place different actions and plans that at the end have a real impact in the victims of the conflict for the ethnic communities. And finally, encourage the Colombian government to continue with the reviewing of the PMI, but especially include special measures to improve the quality of the indicators from the ethnic communities. So I will finish here. Thank you very much. And we invite you to review our report. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Josefina Chavarria. I want to start speaking in Spanish now, but I'll try to limit myself to English. Thank you for being here, for listening to our presentation. I also want to invite you, if you go outside on our welcoming table, you're going to find these wonderful postcards, and in the back, you can see with a QR code, you can go directly and download the report. So we have the report in Spanish because we already had our launch of our report last week in Cali. We have it now in English, and we also have a policy brief in English. So please download the information directly. So we're going to have for this almost last event of the afternoon, a panel of very distinguished speakers. I am very glad because these are three individuals that are also personally committed to human rights and ethnic rights in their lives. And what we see is that because of the implementation of the 2016 Colombian Peace Accord, we also have the opportunity to bring together a lot of your personal and professional trajectories. We want to invite them also because we want to create a space for reflection and dialogue where we can really listen to people's perspectives, not just on our report, but overall on the implementation of the ethnic approach and the ethnic chapter in Colombia. So with us today, we have Elmer Quiñones. Elmer is a researcher with the Accountability Research Center and is based in Bogotá at the moment. He works with the government agencies and civil society organizations on democratization, institutional design, human rights, and transitional justice through the lens of anti-racism. From 2016 until March 2024, he coordinated the advisors of the YAMPE. I think you've heard this name several times. This is the high-level body of ethnic peoples of the Commission for Monitoring, Promoting, and Verifying the implementation of the final Peace Accord. Elmer is an Afro-descendant philosopher with a master's degree from the Institute of Political Studies and International Relations at the National University of Colombia. And he's joining us today. Thank you so much. He flew from Colombia thanks also to the support of Humanity United. So thank you very much for making this possible. Joining us is also Manuel Canawi. He works as a human rights specialist as the Deputy Executive Secretariat for Monitoring, Promotion, and Training of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. He holds a law degree from Rafael Landívar University, a master's in human rights from the University of Navarra, and a graduate diploma in gender studies from Flaxo, Uruguay. He's currently pursuing an LLM at American University, focusing on international humanitarian law and human rights. He was a fellow at the Inter-American Commission LGBTI Rapporteur in 2019 and served as a law clerk at the Constitutional Court of Guatemala between 2012 and 2019. Thank you, Manuel, very much for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Jimena Sanchez Garzoli. She's a human rights and anti-racism advocate at the Washington Office on Latin America, WOLA. This independent organization promotes human rights and justice in the U.S. foreign policy framework in the region, where she directs work in Colombia, Brazil, and Argentina. So rather long and wide portfolio. She previously directed the Haiti work, and for over 19 years, she has brought to DC the voices of people affected by U.S. policies in the region, Afro-descendants, indigenous people, women, LGBTQ+, trade unionists, victims, and displaced persons. She was an advisor to the UN representative for internally displaced persons, Francis M. Deng, from South Sudan at the Brookings Institution. Jimena holds a master's degree in international law and international economics from Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, SIIS. And I've been seeing some of the students here, so I think you're going to have a good reunion. And a BA in Environmental Science and Dance from Columbia University's Barnard College. So welcome, Jimena. Thank you for joining us. I want to just ask a couple of questions from our panelists, maybe one or two from each of you. And I would like to start with Elmer. Elmer, one of the most significant innovations of Colombia's final accord, besides the inclusion of the ethnic chapter, was also the creation of this very special YAMPE and this very special body and forum for ethnic people. That is an advisory body to promote the implementation of the ethnic approach. And since you've had so much experience already, both inside the YAMPE, but also now outside of the YAMPE, tell us, how do you assess the experience and what do you think could be the main takeaways or lessons learned internationally from bodies like this? Thank you.
Thank you. First, thank you to Kroc for inviting me to this important event. And thank you to yours for your effort to be here. I want to speak in Spanish and then uno de los temas más importantes, creo yo, para entender la importancia de la instancia especial de alto nivel de pueblos étnicos es entender también la importancia, creo yo, que mis antecesores lo han dicho, del capítulo étnico. En el capítulo étnico convergen la lucha histórica de los pueblos indígenas y los afrodescendientes en dos grandes dimensiones, en la dimensión étnica y particularmente, y creo yo para nosotros los afrodescendientes, muy importante en el antirracismo. Entonces el capítulo étnico no solo es una pieza histórica de justicia histórica, valga la redundancia, sino es una convergencia de enfoques que incluyen también el enfoque de género. Entonces es una pieza de justicia transicional nueva en la historia de estos 40 años de justicia transicional que intersecciona estos cuatro importantes enfoques. Entonces, es ahí la importancia de la YAMPE. La YAMPE es básicamente la que ha permitido mantener esta voz, ya no en el diseño del acuerdo de paz, sino en su proceso de implementación. Cuando nosotros instalamos... ok, basta.
One of the most important issues to understand the Yampe is its importance is to understand how important the ethnic chapter is. Basically, it's a convergence of the historical fights of Afro-Colombian and indigenous people, and it includes for Afro-Colombians the whole anti-racism issue, as well as racial justice and gender. Within the transitional justice system, we see that. And really, the Yampe has remained the main voice to keep moving this forward.
La experiencia de la IAMPE, que es la pregunta específica, ha sido una experiencia agridulce, porque si bien la IAMPE nos ha permitido mantener la voz en el proceso de implementación, como ustedes pudieron ver en el informe del Instituto Kroc y en los informes que ha producido la misma IAMPE, realmente no ha sido de la manera en que los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes esperaban. Particularmente los retos comenzaron cuando se diseñó el Plan Marco de Implementación. Era la política pues para implementar el acuerdo de paz, eran los primeros 6 meses y ahí comenzamos a ser excluidos. Eso tuvo que forzarse al gobierno nacional para que entrara en un proceso de negociación y así fue que obtuvimos un capítulo étnico también en el Plan Marco de Implementación con 100 indicadores y más de 30 metas específicas para medir este proceso.
This process has been bittersweet, especially when it comes to the process of implementation. You can see this very well from the reports put out by the Kroc and the Yampe itself. This is not the kind of result that the Afro-Colombian indigenous people were expecting. Some of the issues arose when we started with the framework plan for implementation. I think that's PMI. Within the first 6 months, we saw that we were being excluded, and we had to force a negotiation with the government in order to get an ethnic chapter put in that, as well as 100 indicators and 30 goals.
Pero si la IAMPE no estuviera en este lugar, si no tuviéramos esta propia voz, creo que estos 6 puntos de implementación no hubiesen tenido este enfoque diferencial que creo que han permitido que la reforma rural integral tenga un enfoque étnico, que la justicia transicional de la JEP, la Comisión de la Verdad, haya tenido estos importantes capítulos y los demás avances que hemos obtenido. De ahí la importancia y la experiencia central de la IAMPE al traer la voz de los pueblos étnicos. Gracias.
If it weren't for the Yampe's efforts, we would not see that the 6 different parts of the peace agreement would have a differentiated ethnic approach. For example, the rural reform effort, the transitional justice system, including with the HEP and with the Truth Commission and other advances.
Thank you very much, Elmer. Thank you very much, Jimena, also for your translation help. I think that you're pointing out about how this struggle of ethnic peoples continues in different moments, different windows of opportunity in the peace process. And I would like to turn to Manuel because the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights had recently an on-site visit to Colombia, and you also made a lot of observations in relation to not just human rights in general, but also the ethnic rights. And I'm trying to connect how these struggles at the national level also find echo and support internationally.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here on behalf of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. I've been asked to address a very broad subject, so I will try to keep it brief and simple, and we can discuss further later on. Before I get into what we have observed on our on-site visit, I would like to tell you all a little bit about what the Commission is, in case someone is not super familiar, which is a possibility. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is an autonomous and principal body of the OAS, which is the Organization of American States. And we have the mandate to promote and to defend human rights in the hemisphere, basically. So the Caribbean member states and the Inter-American, the continental Americas. To perform this task, which is a very again, a very broad mandate. We have the ability to travel to countries and to observe the human rights situations in those specific countries. And we also gather information from sources, including academic sources, which is, again, this report is very, very helpful for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. If you see our reports, you will see in several instances we cite a lot of what the Kroc Institute has produced, the Barometer Initiative. So this is an example of how our synergies can come together and produce human rights-based observations. With this preliminary explanation of what we do, who we are, I would like to point out that the Commission this year in April traveled to Colombia thanks to an invitation received by the Colombian government. We were allowed to visit Colombia for 5 days of intense observations. We were able to meet with ethnic communities. We were able to meet with Afro-descendant communities, Roma people, Palenquero, Raizales communities, and indigenous peoples in Colombia. We were able to listen what the main challenges were regarding the implementation of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement. Overall, the Commission, well, so far we have published a preliminary observation or preliminary observations, which are available online. We are working now on a full-length report, which you will be able to find hopefully very soon. In our preliminary observations, the Commission found a slow implementation of the peace agreement. During the press conference, the Commission stated there an insufficient implementation of the peace agreement. There are several reasons why the Commission found that this is happening. One of them, and very importantly, because I think it was mentioned earlier, is a lack of coordination in the national level, in the departmental level, and the local level. The Commission has flagged this lack of coordination between the institutions that are in charge of implementing the peace agreement as one of the main challenges. What else is happening? There is intense political polarization in Colombia. This is true in many countries around the region, but in Colombia specifically, this is having a deleterious effect on the implementation of the peace agreement. During the meetings with civil society, with human rights defenders, we were also able to detect that some of the main issues that gave origin to the conflict in Colombia are still very much present, and this needs to be addressed by the state. I'm going to focus on 5 main issues of human rights that the Commission has highlighted in its observations. Number 1 is a weakened presence of the state in territories, specifically in indigenous and Afro-Colombian territories. The presence of the state is either weak or non-existent, and this has been part of the Commission's observations for quite some time now. What happens is that the lack of state presence allows for armed groups, non-state armed groups, to take over and threaten the rights of ethnic communities around the country. Another main issue that the Commission continues to highlight is the continuum, what we call the continuum of violence. The violence has shifted, but the violence is still very much present. We are incredibly concerned about the murder of people who have signed on the peace agreement. At least 425 signatories of the peace agreement have been murdered, and this is an issue of great concern. Human rights defenders are also facing incredible hardship in Colombia. Gender-based violence continues to affect indigenous women, girls, and adolescents. And there's also increased or persistent violence against people with disabilities and Afro-descendant Colombians. Another main area of concern for the Commission is the persistent inequalities, poverty, and exclusion. It was also mentioned earlier, the issue of territory, land ownership, including collective property, continues to be an issue of concern. There is increased pollution in certain areas inhabited by indigenous communities and Afro-Colombian communities, and the issue of crop substitution, illegal crop substitution continues to be of great concern. Finally, I'm going to point to challenges to the freedom of expression. Journalists, specifically journalists covering peace process, and journalists working on the territories are facing increased violence, and they are facing undue pressure to promote or to push certain editorial lines, mostly from non-state groups. And finally, we are continuing to receive challenges by ethnic communities, the difficulties they face in participating on the table in decision-making processes in areas relating to their own properties, so their own territories and rights. The Commission always highlights, of course, the positive aspects of state initiatives. We also highlight civil society initiatives and territorial community-led initiatives that are helping in this still pending process for peace. We will continue to monitor the work, and academic efforts like this, I think, give us quantitative and qualitative data that sometimes international organizations like ours are not in the best position to produce because of our legal, the legal nature of our work, which sometimes pushes us away from producing data. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll be here for any questions later.
Thank you, Manuel. You also reminded us very much of how important it is to have this broader regional perspective, to look at the context throughout the Americas. And this is, I think, a great opportunity to invite Jimena to the conversation. From a continental American perspective, from Las Americas, how is the implementation of the Colombian Peace Accord being viewed at the moment?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Kroc Institute, Humanity United, and all of you for listening to me today. Within that implementation, I'm just going to focus on the ethnic chapter. So the ethnic chapter really is a model instrument for guaranteeing the rights of ethnic peoples in a consultative manner in peace agreements. It came about due to the leadership of Afro-Colombian indigenous movement and authorities who fought hard to get a seat at the table and negotiate inclusion of their individual and collective rights. The ethnic chapter also has revolutionized how transitional justice systems, especially truth commissions, should construct narratives of conflict by considering the core issues that drive the disproportionality and differentiated way that ethnic peoples are affected by the Colombian conflicts, but other conflicts, the legacy of colonialism, slavery, historical marginalization, and structural racism, and also figuring out reparations and healing that comes from different cosmologies. Yampe is a very significant space, and beyond its mandate, it has also given a broader representation of ethnic issues at a national level. The US, especially Obama administration, Congress, and USAID, was fundamental in supporting this ethnic-led process. And since 2016, the US rhetoric on the ethnic chapter in multiple fora, including the UN Security Council, the Forum of People for African Descent, and also within US programming, has been exemplary. We see now that we have a pact for the ethnic chapter that came about last November, which also develops how each institution should contribute to its advancement. And that is really a first step. The Mexican government has engaged in multiple efforts. One of the most recent ones, which was mentioned by the ambassador, which was to bring together lessons learned and good practices of the indigenous peoples in their country, particularly the Yaqui, with Colombian ethnic leaders to look at how this could be helpful for implementation of the ethnic chapter in Chocó. For the first time in history, and I think that the ethnic chapter is one of the pieces that led to this, Colombia has a government that represents its racial, ethnic, and geographic diversity, not only with the first Afro-Colombian vice president, but also its diplomatic corps and within its institutionality. This has greatly assisted in making governance more inclusive, And we see that the rhetoric inclusion of ethnic peoples within the plan of the Petro government are now there, and they have been needed to be there because they're necessary. I don't think that this would have happened without the peace agreement and specifically the ethnic chapter paving the way for further democratization within Colombia. I think all of this is great, but we can see that from the alarming situation that many Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities face today, the Kroc report and the Yampe's recent report, attacks against Yampe leaders, including the murder of a NASA leader last year, and attacks against the technical secretary of the Yampe, the humanitarian situation whereby 61% of the displaced population since 2016 is ethnic, that this is a very opportune and necessary discussion for us to have, and that the title of the Kroc report, I think, really says it all. We have to basically all figure out how we can advance this implementation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jimena, for your words. I think that this, what is the role or how are these different organizations of civil society building alliances together, working together is quite important. And I want to go back to Elmer exactly on this question of the role of the international community in supporting the effort of ethnic communities and ethnic populations in Colombia. And how do you evaluate the role of the international community? But also, what other opportunities do you see that we can intensify, that we can strengthen to make that international cooperation even better?
Gracias, creo que la pregunta es muy importante. Le doy la bienvenida al señor embajador de Colombia en Estados Unidos. Es un placer tenerlo acá con nosotros. La comunidad internacional, como lo muestra cuando se adhirió a Estados Unidos a llenar ese vacío profundo del capítulo étnico, y México también juega un papel fundamental en la implementación del capítulo étnico y en general del acuerdo de paz. Yo creo que, como se ha mostrado con la adhesión de Estados Unidos, puede jugar un papel muy importante en términos de apoyo técnico, político y particularmente apoyo financiero. Yo creo que con los retos que ustedes han podido ver acá, que tenemos en particular la situación tan grave de seguridad, envolver más, o sea, que la comunidad internacional se involucre más fuerte y mejor en términos de apoyo político y financiero a la implementación del capítulo étnico puede jugar un papel, digamos, transformador con relación a esta situación tan complicada que afrontamos.
I want to thank you for that very important question and give a warm welcome to the Ambassador of Colombia to the United States. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Both the US and Mexico play a very important role in not just implementing the ethnic chapter, but also the peace agreement. The US can do more in terms of providing technical assistance, political assistance, and mainly financial support for implementation of the ethnic chapter. As you heard about the gaps we have in terms of security, this is basically a call to the international community that they need to do more in terms of politically and financially helping to transform what is happening in Colombia.
No solo quiero referirme, digamos, al trabajo de los estados, que es tan importante en todo el espacio multilateral que ocupan, donde pueden hacer un trabajo muy fundamental, sino también las universidades, la sociedad civil y diferentes grupos de la comunidad internacional que de envolverse y entender la pieza fundamental que es el capítulo étnico, tal vez podrían fortalecer este proceso de justicia, defensa de los territorios y defensa de nosotros en términos de supervivencia como pueblos y como ese legado histórico que siempre hemos tenido a lo largo de todas las Américas y particularmente en Colombia. Entonces, sin duda alguna, la cooperación internacional no solo es fundamental, sino es requerida en la situación tan compleja que estamos afrontando. Gracias.
Talk about international support. I'm not just talking about the multilateral space and individual states. I'm also talking about universities, civil society, and different groups that need to first understand the ethnic chapter and also help advance it. We need this because we need not only help with defending our territory and defending us as people, but also for our survival as populations. The legacy of that we are living in Colombia is something that is also seen throughout the Americas. And for all of this, we need to have international accompaniment.
Thank you very much, Helmer, and thank you very much, Jimena. I think that precisely also your comments invite us to think what else we can all do as civil society and not just looking at the governments. And I think that these systems, for example, the Inter-American system, also plays a very important role. And I wanted to invite Manuel maybe to help us identify more clearly the recommendations that you have put forward and that you're continuing pushing towards the defense of especially ethnic rights in Colombia. And it maybe help us also understand how can we better integrate or harmonize the Inter-American and the universal system for international human rights in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the mention of survival. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is very aware that survival of community leaders, the protection of the human rights and the life and integrity of social leaders and community defenders is of the utmost importance. I will keep it very brief because I think our time is running out. But the Commission has issued several recommendations. We have dedicated at least 2 yearly reports, one chapter of the yearly report a couple of years ago, to analyze the status of the implementation of the ethnic chapter. And the most consistent recommendation is for the state to adopt urgent measures to ensure the right to life and integrity of ethnic community leaders, of the collectivity as a whole. The Commission, the Inter-American system, as you may know, considers that the connection between indigenous people and Afro-descendant communities to the land is integral to their own survival. So a lot of our recommendations are in that sense to guarantee the survival of the communities, to ensure the right to property, including collective property rights, which is a very well-established standard in the Inter-American jurisdiction, to protect the rights of communities in the context of extractive activities by private companies, and to ensure, this is very important, appropriate and effective participation and prior consent of the communities, especially when dealing with peace processes in their own territories. I think I will wrap it up here. The Commission has many tools, including precautionary measures, including public hearings, including on-site visits like the one we just had. So to link to your other question, we will continue to unfold all our mechanisms. And we can collaborate with the universal system, the UN system, and of course the mission of the OAS that is permanently in Colombia, accompanying the peace process. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. When we started this panel almost like half an hour ago, we were saying how each one of you is also a testament to this much longer struggles, generational struggles for Colombia. And I wonder, just to close with Jimena, what are your reflections about the role of the international support precisely to move forward in the implementation, not just of the ethnic chapter, but overall of the ethnic approach in Colombia?
So as you've heard, ethnic territories face multi-level complex conflicts and violence that require actions beyond or in conjunction with the ethnic chapter. The full solution to these issues really falls more within the total peace process and a differentiated approach in terms of drug policies. However, there are areas where the ethnic chapter can advance. The roadmap of what needs to be done is clear. The IAMPE in its report includes a series of recommendations that, if implemented, can advance implementation to at least 60% of the ethnic chapter by 2026. However, for this to happen, you have to consider the reality and the obstacles. While the executive branch in Colombia is on board and prioritizes this issue, the overall Colombian institutionality and society are not prioritizing ethnic communities. Shortcomings include inertia in advancing programs, gap between the national regional levels, coordination issues, overlapping mandate wars, and at times corruption. Within the institutions, there are persons also who are very resistant or uninterested in advancing this agenda. Structural racism and prejudices against the ethnic peoples remain. At times, some also find it challenging to have ethnic people in position of power. The vice president has developed a strategy with priorities and pushed its institutions to advance. The pact is part of that. Also in May 2024, she issued a directive. And basically, since then, has been trying to get international cooperation to align with those priorities, and it has been inadequate. The US, for example, was presented a plan that is still under negotiation. In my view, it is also unfair to place the entirety of advancing ethnic issues on Vice President Francia Marquez. Ethnic people can and should lead efforts, but it can't be, the whole burden can't be put on them. This needs to be a whole of government effort. I think it's positive that President Petro formulated a plan, Choque, to accelerate the peace accord. The Minister of the Interior has taken this very seriously and made it a priority issue. But that ministry also needs to guarantee that there is a differentiated approach in its implementation by formally putting together an internal group that advances the ethnic chapter and guarantees that within the programs that it is advancing, we see an ethnic component. One of these is the immediate action plans for indigenous peoples at risk of extinction were not prioritized and put in the PDETs. And so we need to have that at the different levels of what is being put. In terms of US cooperation, ethnic chapter implementation, other programs, some of which precede the ethnic chapter, that include ethnic beneficiaries, tend to be placed all within the umbrella of ethnic chapter implementation. And we think that there needs to be an assessment to figure out really independently what are the parts that are really ethnic chapter implementation, what other parts that are supporting Afro-Colombian and indigenous, in order to really know what the gap is so it can be prioritized and be more strategic. International cooperation beyond the US and Mexico is also needed. The other donor countries need to devise a joint funding plan explicitly for implementing the ethnic chapter. This needs to be included with and done with the YAMPE and independent ethnic civil societies such as Ethnic Commission COMPA. And we need to have more international civil society really monitoring and pushing for this to advance. Within Colombia, the ethnic chapter is very important, but its importance and anti-racism efforts need to be socialized more and worked on. The US, as the first international accompanier, needs to devise a joint strategy with Colombia to implement the ethnic chapter. The plan should be created in consultation and concertation with YAMPE. I know we repeat that a lot, but we think that it needs to be emphasized and incorporate its recommendations. For further consideration of what is needed in this plan, I will refer you to the US civil society letter sent to Secretary Blinken in March 2023, which contains a series of recommendations on how to make that strategy the most effective. One thing I would add since then is that it now should also include the Vice President's priorities. The US Congress must also fully fund peace efforts and in particular, line items for Afro-Colombian and indigenous and the ethnic chapter. Basically everyone from Colombian ethnic groups, authorities, governments, international coalition, and civil society needs to get together and redouble the efforts to close the gap between the intention and the action regarding the ethnic chapter.
Thank you very much, Jimena, and thank you not just to you, but also to Elmer and to Manuel for your reflections, for your discussion points and for your invitation also to our audience to engage more fully with the ethnic approach, the ethnic chapter, and the ethnic rights. We have around maybe maximum of 10 minutes for maybe some questions from the audience, if anyone would like to engage some of our panelists. Yes, if you just tell us your name. I can't read until there. I think it's Steven or Stefan. No,
no. My name
Oh.
is Ross Silvestria.
Oh.
My question to the panelist is, much has been talked about the disproportionate violence faced by ethnic communities and the systemic issues they face. I'm curious, were any of these systemic issues contributor to the decades-long conflict, and how does the ethnic commitment or ethnic chapter seek to address those?
Let me see if there's another question we might maybe collect before we go to our closing remarks by the ambassador. Okay, so let me just invite the panelists to address this question, please.
Gracias por la pregunta. Cuando nosotros nos preguntábamos por qué el impacto desproporcionado de la violencia armada en nuestros territorios, nos dimos cuenta que tenía que ver con un proceso también de injusticia histórica, y por eso el capítulo étnico une el tema de la justicia transicional con la justicia histórica. Eso tiene que ver también con el reconocimiento que ha hecho el gobierno nacional de esa unión, y en este momento tenemos una Comisión Nacional de Reparaciones Históricas que instituyó el actual gobierno, lo que nos va a poder, digamos, garantizar que trabajemos estos dos enfoques, el enfoque de justicia transicional y el enfoque de justicia histórica, y eso es como el eje fundamental también del capítulo étnico en términos de lo que tú direccionas.
When we were asking ourselves, why is there the existence of disproportionate armed violence in our territories, basically, we saw that it really has to do with the historical injustices that our communities have faced. The ethnic chapter actually unifies the historical with the transitional justice. And now we have a national commission for reparations that is trying to figure out how you do that, looking at both the historical and the current, and help through the ethnic chapter. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Jimena. I don't know if you or Manuel would also like to, maybe, even if it's not directly addressing that question, just your last few words.
I think the most important thing about the ethnic chapter is that it actually acknowledges the historical aspects and the structural racism. That, I think, for Colombia is a huge, huge thing, and is incredibly important, because it's the first time you're seeing, really at a more national level, a debate that includes that. And then that was basically transmitted through the efforts done through the transitional justice system, especially through the HEP cases, also with the Truth Commission and its efforts to recognize and find that within its report. And so I think it kind of opened the door to a more national level discussion that isn't just a discussion that Afro-Colombian and indigenous people have.
Oh, thank you for your question. That's a great question, because from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, we acknowledge and we understand that the systemic inequalities, the racism, and the exclusion are, among others, at the root causes of the conflict. We also understand that the peace agreement as a whole, and the ethnic chapter specifically, if implemented adequately, would help tackle these root causes of conflict. So for us, the implementation of the peace agreement and the ethnic chapter specifically is a matter of human rights, and that is why we continue to call on the state and civil society to work for the full implementation of the ethnic chapter. Thank you.
very much. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience for your time and your attention. And please join me with an applause. Thank you. And I would just give the word to our host, Maura, to welcome the ambassador.
Thank you very much, Josefina, and to our fine panel. Now for the final part of our panel for our event this afternoon, I'd like to invite the ambassador of Colombia to the United States, who's with us this afternoon. Ambassador, excuse me, move my pages all around of his bio. Ambassador Daniel Garcia Peña was appointed to become the Colombia's ambassador to the U.S. this past July. He has a very distinguished career, previously having served as Colombia's High Commissioner for Peace and the Council and for Council in Paris. In addition, he has been a professor at prestigious Colombian universities. He is a professor in the Department of Political Science at the National University of Colombia and professor of history at the Universidad de los Andes. And he participates as a political analyst in opinion programs and print media, radio, and television. We are honored to have the ambassador with us to give some final remarks. And then please, I hope everyone will stay for a reception after the conclusion of the program. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I missed the event. It's been a very hectic few days and today in particular, but I'm really delighted to be here, to have heard the last panel, which was very interesting. And I am here in the name of the Colombian Embassy in Washington. I'm here with several members of the staff, Pablo Mina, Andrea Lloreda, Oscar Gamboa. I think Claudia Cuevas is around there somewhere as well, just part of the staff that is an indication of the importance that we in the embassy give to this event and to the issue that you have discussed. The releasing of the report, a call to action, third special report on the state of the implementation of ethnic approach of the final agreement, which for us is one of the top priorities that we have, that I have, that are my predecessor, then Ambassador Luis Gilberto Murillo, and today Foreign Ministry has given to this in our bilateral relation with the United States. And as was pointed out, I think it was by Jimena in the panel, the role of the U.S. in this implementation is fundamental. The United States is a prime, the number one contributor to the implementation of the agreement. And we, in my name, in the name of the government of President Petro, of Vice President Francia Marquez, and all of us that are so committed to the peace process in Colombia, we greatly appreciate the work that the Kroc Institute has carried out and continues to carry it out in monitoring the implementation of the agreement. Your persistent dialogue with communities, with victims, with civil society, with local leaders and authorities has yielded lessons and good practices that are models, not only for what we are doing in Colombia, but for the entire world. I've been committed to the issue of peace for many years and have had the honor to talk about these issues in different parts of this country and of the world. And everywhere that you go, there's admiration for the fact that the Colombian Peace Accord is historic in including this ethnic chapter, the focus on ethnic communities, which is a milestone, not only in Colombia, but I think for the world and for our countries. It is a great opportunity for the ethnic communities in Colombia to shape and promote a sustainable and lasting peace. The 1991 Constitution enshrined and defined Colombia as a multicultural and pluriethnic society. And with the late 70 of 1993, the ethnic rights of Afro-Colombian communities were recognized by the state. And the Constitution also established clearly the rights of the indigenous peoples in our country, so that this ethnic chapter of the agreement is not foreign. On the contrary, it is part of what our Constitution establishes and mandates. And it was a result of the struggles of our ethnic communities. When the FARC and the government sat down to talk about the peace process and they set the agenda. To be honest, this was not on the agenda. This was the result of pressure from outside, from the Afro-Colombian, from the indigenous communities, and not only on this issue, women's organizations that forced the FARC and the government to sit down and talk about gender. And there's also a chapter dealing with gender issues. So this agreement, yes, the signatories are President Santos and Rodrigo Londoño on the part of the FARC as the main, let's say, figures and partners of the agreement. But in fact, the agreement is the result of years, of decades of struggles of the peoples in Colombia, of the communities of the Afro-Colombian and indigenous peoples, and the women that I have just mentioned. It is important, as the Kroc Institute has stated in its findings, to understand the limitations of the ethnic approach. And according to the DANE, the National Administration of Department of Statistics, the ethnic chapter has an implementation rate of 47%, while the other points of the agreement have an average implementation of 60%. For this reason, the Colombian government is working to accelerate the implementation of the ethnic chapter with a goal of reaching 60% by 2026. Our Vice President, Francia Marquez, has led and initiated a strategy for the holistic implementation of the ethnic chapter with the participation of different government agencies. And this plan, this commitment comprises several aspects. Thematic emphasis on each of the points of the peace agreement, guidelines for mobilizing technical and financial resources and particular measures for each territory. President Petro has insisted in one of the defining characteristics of the policy of paz total, of total peace, is the implementation of the accord, but the presence of the state in these regions of Colombia that for many years were abandoned, ignored, a term that I always quote from my predecessor and now Minister of Foreign Relations, La Colombia Profunda, the Colombia in those areas that are not in the big cities where much of the population lives, but has been abandoned and ignored for decades. So for the first time since signing the peace agreement, the government of Colombia has allocated important resources to the special high-level instance for ethnic peoples, the EANPE, and this will fund strategies to enhance its capacity. It is also important to point out the role, as I mentioned before, of the United States and particularly USAID that is playing a vital role in this new challenge that we face. So we appreciate the acknowledgement by the Kroc Institute of the progress that has been made by the current administration. At the same time, we also understand that there's much more to do, that we are still far from achieving the just and sustainable peace that was signed in the agreement, but that continues to elude Colombia as a nation. However, it is also clear to understand that we are committed, the president and the vice president leading the government, that this is an opportunity to accelerate, to make up for lost time, and that is why we are very hopeful that this year, 2024, coordination between agencies and sectors will improve the implementation thus far, and will be able to produce concrete results on the ground, because we know that there are statistics, and we talk about a lot of policies, but if this does not affect the lives of people, concrete communities in the territories, and the job is not complete. The Petro and Marquez administration is very much aligned with the idea that the implementation of the agreement is absolutely coherently linked to the implementation of our national development plan, the comprehensive agrarian reform, and the peace accords ethnic chapter. So this revised framework will be presented in this year, in 2024, in the 8th anniversary of the peace accord. Challenges, as I said, have mentioned, remain, and the Kroc Institute is an indispensable ally to help us to continue to monitor and to measure how the implementation is going, to guarantee that agencies invest in ethnic communities, to strengthen interinstitutional coordination, to effectively implement the particularities of the ethnic approach, avoiding the re-victimization of families, communities, and territories. And lastly, to consolidate efforts at the national, regional, and local level for the construction of a lasting and equitable peace. What we see is that there is progress made. History has been historically steps that have never been seen before, but no doubt the task ahead is huge, and the government of President Petro and Vice President Marquez are committed to not only comply with what is stated in the agreement, not only because it was agreed upon in that historic document, but because more than anything else, it is a historical debt with the communities of Colombia, with the Afro-Colombian, with the indigenous peoples of our country, and therefore the commitment is for many reasons a top priority of this administration, and will continue to be for us in the embassy a key element to work together with the U.S. partners, with the different agencies of the U.S. government that are involved with this, and we would like to also extend our gratitude to the way that the Biden administration, in particular, has accepted this challenge of working together with Colombia on the implementation of the ethnic chapter, in particular, but of the peace accord in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Josefina, and to your wonderful team who came from South Bend, also from Bogota, to be with us today. Please, everyone, stay and enjoy some refreshments and each other's company. Thank you so much for being here today.